Philippine politics remain to be somehow dominated by families that successfully turned elected positions in government as private legacies. Elections are contested by political clans. Dynasties have continued to expand through the decades, which result to the continuous shrinking of spaces for leaders, groups, and political parties. As we all know, political dynasty is one of the traditional and ongoing political issue in the Philippines, and also considering that the 2022 election is just around the corner, so I figured out to invite persons that can help us unravel the issue of political dynasty. So from your own perspective, what is political dynasty?
Political dynasty has been known to be a family whose members, related up to second degree by consanguinity or affinity, whether legitimate or illegitimate, half or full blood, are actually involved in politics by running for public office or maintaining control of elective positions in government, whether through succession or by simultaneously holding such positions. For the past decades, Philippines have been known to have a practice of political dynasty, where large families or clans have been known for governing barangays, cities and municipalities up to provinces and sometimes even the nation. From the father being a barangay captain up to the child who's running for SK chairman, just for example. Political dynasties have somehow become natural to the Philippines because of the maintenance of control among their scope of governance. Well, I simply view political dynasty as the passing of power and responsibilities from a root to well-known relatives, knowing the legacy of the clan will continue. It means like bestowing power upon one another in order to have order and accordance to the goal of past leaders.
You've mentioned that these families or well-known surnames often simultaneously govern to maintain control of elective positions in the government. Well, do you agree or disagree to have multiple candidates or leaders from the same clan or family to govern a certain place or even the country?
With ideology giving way to personal loyalty, politics is increasingly seen as the marketplace for family members. Like family businesses that have split in multiple rounds, like an amoeba, political parties too are likely to be so if the current trend continues. In this case, some people are in contrary to this practice simply because they somehow already consider this as a domination. Additionally, they even discussed to limit the positions of relatives within the second degree of consanguinity and affinity be allowed to run. I then think that it is disagreeable to have multiple people involved in politics from the same clan. Well, simply because I think that the power to govern a place can be disseminated to many and not be held and limited to one clan only. In addition to that, this also concerns the act from duty of an individual which has the capability to serve genuinely and truthfully to the public, which encompasses the true essence of responsibility of being a leader. Therefore, we should not vote or elect based on popularity, social status, and their too good to be true promises, but rather vote those who are knowledgeable and fitting for the job, those who have pure intentions of serving the best interests of the masses.
You're also hypothetically telling that in political dynasty, the power to govern a certain place only revolves around one to limited clan. Do you somehow consider this as an abuse of power? Since you've stated that the governance only circles on the same clan or families.
To tell you frankly, yes, I consider this practice in accordance to abuse of power, simply because the power, along with the responsibilities, are only limited to the same family members involved in politics. Just for example, if I ran for the position of president because my father, the current president, said so, then would I be acting from duty or would I be acting in accord with duty? For me, I would have used my power to bestow on another person responsibilities because that's how I know it runs. I also believe that power should not be limited to one clan only because of the responsibility to continue legacy and restore the fame of the family.
In some circumstances, if you were given a responsibility, not a chance, to follow the milestone and continue the legacy of your relative through the practice of political dynasty, would you consider this as an act in accord with duty or an act from duty?
Well, I can give you situations to satisfy your question. If I take that responsibility, do everything and provide everyone's needs, but still manages to follow the milestone and continue the legacy of my father, then I'd consider this as an act from duty as it gets along with morality where I attain goals and aspirations in an acceptable way. But if I lead because of the goal of maintaining the legacy of my father, regardless of how it will be attained, then I consider that as an act in accord with duty because I didn't do it for the sake of morality.
Given an example, if you want to attain your desired personal goals along with the maintenance of your legacy and restoration of fame in the family, then you have only one choice, which is to follow an order to get into practice of political dynasty. Do you agree with this statement? Why or why not?
Well, this reminds me of Hypothetical Imperatives by Kant, which explains that if I want something, then I should follow commands. This explains that I am only up for my aspirations and the desire to attain it without thinking if the act is moral choice or not. This also refrain you from being autonomous. Let me tell you something, which contrasts your point of view with hypothetical imperatives. If I were given the responsibility to lead, I would do it in the sense of having unconditional duty. Meaning, regardless of my goals and aspiration, I ought to perform or refrain from performing certain types of action no matter what. The responsibility of being a leader is what I must follow, regardless of my desire to continue the legacy of my father.
You have mentioned that the following orders and commands when you want something somehow refrain you from being autonomous. What do you mean by that? Are you pertaining to the limitations that can be given to you once you follow the milestone of your past leaders, which is also from your clan?
Just like what I've said and given as an example, if my father urges me to follow his milestone to lead the country and maintain power within our clan, it simply pertains to dictatorship and it would refrain me from being autonomous. Well, autonomy, as we all know, is the governing, regulating, restraining oneself, including one's choice or courses of action, in accord with most principles, which are one's own and which are binding on everyone. Autonomy means self-law. You know, the power of autonomy has something to do with ending dictatorship for political dynasties. Example is when a father tells the son to run for the same position to at least preserve the legacy is already dictatorship. But when the son refuses and made an autonomous decision in not following his father's will, then it could somehow end political dynasty, given the fact that the child is at awareness of morality and that continuing legacy through the practice of political dynasty doesn't prove any moral worth, and which encompasses the universality of leading. This could probably cause political dynasty to an end.
Wow, those answers and explanation would really be of great help for everyone in understanding the concept of political dynasty. Now let's ask Miss Beninsig to join the conversation.
Hello, I am so honored to be invited to your podcast to converse about an issue that is quite very relevant nowadays.
That's true enough.
It is, knowing that the upcoming election is fast approaching.
Yes, so ma'am, as an ethicist which studies virtue ethics, what can you say about political dynasties?
Well, they basically rule the country.
How can you say that they rule the country?
In the sense that they see to it that it is still them who controls, or at least the power is still within their reach.
So, can I say that you are against this practice?
Now that's a question. For me to answer that, I must see to it that I have no prejudices nor biases. Am I right?
Of course.
Well, political dynasties contradict the democratic living of the people. How so? It restrains the people from opportunities or chances to run or sit in the public office. But what does it really mean to be democratic? To be democratic means to have the freedom to choose who you want to be your leader, and it is also the belief in or practice of the idea that all people are socially equal. This means that even the daughters, sons, in-laws, relatives, and etc. of those who are already seated have the right to run. In the 1987 Philippine Constitution, Article 11, Section 26, it mentioned that the state shall guarantee equal access to opportunities for public service. Thus, we can say that even the far relatives can run for a position if they meet the legal requirements. We cannot we cannot really prohibit them from what they please to do.
Prohibiting them would contradict what it means to achieve democracy. However, political dynasties, like what you've said earlier, undermines the democratic safeguard of the people to make sure that everyone has the equal chance to sit in public office. It is the same surnames that we see over and over again. In my case, we are under the ruling of the same clan even before the time of my grandfather.
During the time of my grandmother as well, it is the same clan that have been sitting on these positions. Even up to this day, it is themselves that they are up against. It is as if the city is a sort of family heirloom for them to pass down from one relative to another. It is true that the people are the ones who are choosing their leaders, but we need to consider the fact that the people are used to their dispensation or management, especially if we see them in a good light. It is natural for people to be afraid of change after being comfortable. I repeat, it is natural for people to be afraid of change. But then we are also afraid to be in their opposition, knowing how powerful these families are.
So, is it safe to say that you are not in favor of political dynasty?
Yes, yes. For the negative effects in the political dynasties outweighs the what ifs of their capabilities. It is true that they might be good at serving the people, but then again, it is also true that there will always be another person who can do just as good or even better than them. They might be showcasing the right acts of services to the mass, but what of their intentions? Their character? These people are often not equipped with the right conduct in carrying out an act.
What do you mean by that?
Okay. For example, these families are helping the mass through gift giving, but not with the intention to actually help them, but rather to have these people be in awe and to make sure that the majority would always see them as the heroes and hope in times of crisis. Some may think that they are embracing us, but they are already grasping us within their palms, within their hold, for them to control and making us believe to choose them as the best representative for the mass. But we are blinded that they are just running for their best interest, and that's a fact.
So, are you just saying that because they are doing the right act doesn't mean that they are good?
Exactly. That is on the context of virtue ethics, where we examine the character and the motives of the person who is performing an act. We should always ask ourselves if what they are doing has benefits for them and what these are.
So, it's safe to say that political dynasties are not doing in the best interest of the people, but for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That is why I believe that this tradition should have long been demolished. The bill has not yet been passed, but in the near future, I hope it will be.
Hello, good morning. It's very nice to join you today, and I am very happy to be a part of your discussion.
Thank you for saying yes to this conversation. To start, my first question to you is, who are these political dynasties? How did they emerge and sustain their power?
That's a very good question to start with, JK, no? And I think we need to consult a very multidisciplinary package of literature in order to understand where dynasties actually come from. Let me start by noting that political dynasties exist in so many democracies around the world. It is not just only here in the Philippines now which political dynasty is present. In fact, in a study I found that political dynasties are more common in democracies that are younger or in countries that are less developed. If you check the literature here in the Philippines along with historical literature, political science literature, and maybe even the economics literature to the extent that it connects on this. Political dynasties tend to come from very powerful and wealthy political families, and at least one interpretation is whenever our democracy was born and we began a system where we would appoint and choose leaders based on votes rather than sheer power or dominance. The current power structures were easily transformed into political power structures because they had resources. They had long ties with many people who depended on them. And so it was sort of transformed, and it lingers today in terms of politically powerful families also being some of the wealthiest economically powerful families.
Yes, so it's like a cycle that is very hard to break. We wanted to replace them, but the people replacing them are also doing what their predecessors are also doing. So maybe that's also the reason why sometimes there are some researchers that calling these political dynasties that are endemic already. That is actually hard to try, to break, or to reform.
Yes, and perhaps the best way to think about it is as an anti corruption drive. You will not be able to stop corruption if you simply replace now the leaders without changing the system. The same is true of political power concentration and the prevalence of political dynasties. It boils down to a lack of political competition. So, if you simply change by putting on a new face but do not change the system, that new face will most likely be tempted or forced to play the same rotten game. So, institutional reforms, political party reforms, dynasty regulation, and many other reforms are required to strengthen political parties and replace that rotten system with something that surely empowers citizens.
I am also hoping that maybe a few years from now, we can feel a reform for at least there is a change. Would you mind if I ask your perspective if all dynasties are bad?
Some may argue that not all dynasties are bad. After all, some notable leaders have come from political dynasties. Isn't monopolizing power and wealth for multiple generations by the same people and families by now detrimental to our country's growth and development? With much the same types of leaders adopting the practices and principles of their predecessors, our leaders' perspectives will be restricted to what is already known and exists. There will be no new ideas or voices to contribute to our society's advancement. Having considered all of these factors, whether historical or contemporary, I believe that political dynasties will continue to exist in our government for the foreseeable future. It will be hard to break such a long-standing pattern, especially with a government made up entirely of these dynasties. However, this does not imply that they will last indefinitely. With newer candidates and a wiser voter population, it is safe to say that each election could be the last of these dynasties of political power.
That being said, do you agree that one of the benefits of having a political dynasty in charge of your area is that the projects begun by the previous politician can be completed by the next?
Among the few minor benefits of having a political dynasty in charge of your area is that the projects begun by the previous politician can be completed by the next. But, in my opinion, Even if the next politician appointed is unrelated to the previous one, he will continue the initiative if he sees it as beneficial to citizens. Political dynasties are members of the privileged class, if not by virtue of their status, then by virtue of their wealth. Their presence in our political system strengthens the privileged power over the poor. This act is unjust and unfair because the government is not something that can be owned by a family. The effect of political dynasties here in the Philippines is extremely concerning, JK, no? But it is critical to remember that their power is dependent on us, the voters. As somebody who has witnessed this strategy and method in my hometown, I believe that people should be aware of which candidates are worth voting for and not base their vote solely on surname or familiarity. Without the people of this country, political leaders are nothing. If citizens became aware and well informed about the who, what, where, when, and how of politics one day, that would be a significant step toward a well governed country. Also, I just like to point out that there are two major reforms underway and I hope you will join them: political party reform and dynasty regulation. Even if only one of these two can be supported, significant changes are about to occur in our country for the betterment of our democracy, regardless of the system of government. When making important decisions, such as political decisions, we should aim for the betterment of our society as a whole, in the sense that we should produce the most common good for the most people, taking into account everyone who is affected. If there are advantages to having political dynasties, they are vastly outweighed by the disadvantages. Ultimately, we have a significant impact on the abolition of political dynasties. Being a registered voter can greatly assist in bringing down these families who abuse their power and position.
Yes, actually, I'm also pushing for that, and I am also supporting those kinds of reforms because I can also see in my study that we need that in order to progress and in order to develop, for us not to become stagnant as to what we are right now. So, any last message to our listeners before we end this conversation?
No, I just wanted to thank you again for the opportunity to catch up with you. You brought up some very important points, and I do not claim to know everything that needs to be answered in terms of our governance and democracy. But I look to speakers like you to continue to guide us in terms of asking the right questions and, guiding our young people to do the right thing by our democracies.
Okay, so that's it. I think it's a wrap. This conversation has been fun and educationally satisfying at the same time. It is quite true that we pursue our political views differently because we were born into different roots, thus triggering our subjective perspectives. Political dynasties should be looked into further depriving judgments because one cannot hold power too long and things change as the society undergoes eternal changes. I do not claim, none of us do claim, that we know everything just as what Chloe said earlier. But open conversations like this could create spaces that empower our voices even though they project different tunes. Power may corrupt you, but it is still within one's hands if he yields that corruption in the bright and benevolent side. This spaces that reflects the different colors we are part of, and through them, we create hues that serve as bridges for what we call unity and equality. My views, our views on political dynasties may differ, or basically any other political matter there is to discuss, but we can share our views to create our one solid vision to empower our democracy. This has been your podcast. I hope we are all good, and I hope we are all in for goodness this coming national elections. Thank you for tuning in with us. Have a good day ahead. Goodbye.